So I just read the Vinland Sagas. I read the whole thing in a day because they're super short. And these are the sagas of the Icelandic, Greenlandic, the Norse people, their discovery of North America. Now, these were written down about 200 years after the events, so there had been an oral tradition of passing these stories on for generations until finally someone decided to write them down. You could think about it like if today someone went to Paris or London and asked people, what do you know about Napoleon or Trafalgar? What was the deal with that? Like, tell me the stories that have been passed down and writing it down. Like, so that's the sort of the time difference between the events and it being written down. So I'm not going to get into the veracity of it or what has been changed over the years, but there are still some hard facts that these people did come here, and that's another thing that I find amazing about this. So the Vinland, the place that they go, they call it Vinland after the wild grapevines that they find there. That is here where I am right now. They don't know exactly where it is. Some of them even speculate that it's down in New York, but I don't think they went all the way to New York. I think that's just sort of Americans in New York want to believe that they went that far. But it's strange to me that this place that I live in that seems to have so little history in terms of like long-term history, that over 1,000 years ago, people from Northern Europe came here way before, hundreds and hundreds of years before Christopher Columbus sailed across the Atlantic. There were Norse people just going out in these tiny little boats. I mean, they weren't tiny, they weren't boats, but it just boggles my mind. I really love the history of Vikings and their culture. It just seems so. They just get in a boat, just set off into the North Atlantic, the North Atlantic, not knowing where they're going, just sort of like, we'll just head out this way. Oh, I hear there's land this way. Yeah, so and so got blown off course and said he found some land. Let's go check it out, and they just go. Like, the only other group of people that I can think of would be the Polynesians, who did a similar thing, just sort of like spread across the South Pacific. But to me, if I was going to sort of journey in a small boat in unknown waters, I'd much rather be in the South Pacific than the North Atlantic. Like, these people, these Vikings, these Norse explorers, they just blow my mind. So the Vinland Sagas contain two different sagas. There's the saga of the Greenlanders and Eric the Red's saga. So these are two different written accounts, completely independently created, but drawing on that same oral tradition and sort of retelling the same events. And there are some slight differences between the two, and in this book, the introduction, they go through and compare and contrast. But overall, there is, you can clearly see there's a grain of truth. There are some historical events that actually did happen that are recorded in these two independent sagas. First one, the saga of the Greenlanders, is much shorter of the two. It's the one that I found more easy to follow and more sort of coherent, and it made more sense in my brain. So it's the saga of the Greenlanders. So Greenland has already been settled by Eric the Red, and there's this guy Bjarmi who he's in Norway, and then he goes back to Iceland because he always spends the winter with his father who lives in Iceland. And he finds out when he gets back to Iceland that his father's actually gone off to see Eric the Red and spend the winter with Eric the Red in Greenland. So he's like, oh man, well, I always spend the winter with my father. You know what, guys, we're going to Greenland. And none of these people on the ship have ever been to Greenland. He's never been to Greenland, but they're like, okay, let's do it. So they head off to sea, and they get lost, the weather stuff, they get blown off course, and they come to this land with forests and sort of hills and stuff, and the weird thing is he doesn't stop there. All the people on the boat are like, hey, let's stop and check this place out, and he's like, no, this is definitely not Greenland, we're gonna keep going. So then they go off, and then they find another place that's more hilly and forests, and he's like, hey, should we check this out? We need sort of water and stuff. And he's like, no, we're fine, we're not checking it out, definitely not Greenland, let's keep going. They find another place that seems like a barren wasteland, and he's like, okay, there's nothing there, we're not stopping there either. And eventually he finds his way to Greenland, and he meets up with his father, and they go see Eric the Red, and he tells him about all this land he found. And all the people are sort of like, why didn't you actually get off and visit this land? Like, why, like he has a lack of curiosity that they almost find offensive in a Norse explorer, which I don't know if like, it seems to me that if you did come across these lands, you would stop, if nothing more than just to get on fresh water. So I don't know if that the story is telling it this way so that he's the one who actually discovered it, but because he didn't technically set foot there in the story, then the person who does sort of gets all the glory. That was sort of my taking of it, but maybe I'm wrong. Maybe this guy was just like, no, we want to go to Greenland. We're not going to this new land that I found. Anyway, so word gets around that there's this land to the west, and Eric the Red's son, Leif Erikson, is like, I'm putting together a crew, we're going to go check out this land. And he tries to get his father, Eric the Red, who had been the first one to, I'm not sure if he discovered Greenland or he's the first to settle Greenland, but Eric the Red's like this big explorer. He's like, come on, Dad, let's go. We need you. You're like a super lucky guy. You're great at finding new places. Let's go. And Eric the Red doesn't really want to go, but he finally agrees. And on the way to the coast, he falls off his horse and like hurts himself. And he's like, nope, that's it. That's a sign. I'm not going. I'm too old for this. You do it. So Leif Erikson, he gets a boat, he gets a bunch of dudes, and they head off. And they sort of do a reverse. Those three places that Bjarmi had visited, they do in reverse order. So they first come to the sort of the barren wasteland, and they name that Helluland, which means like stone slab land, because it's like super flat and nothing there but like a ton of glaciers on top. So that's sort of the, I would say, Baffin Island, the very northern Canada tundra. And then they sail out, and then they find another land that's like kind of hilly and lots of forests, and they call it Markland because Mark means forest, and it's the land of the forests, which I think that's sort of understood to be Labrador, the Labrador coast. And then finally they keep heading south, and they enter into what they call Vinland. They've been stopping and visiting each of these lands, and the third one they go in and they find grapevines, they find self-sown wheat, which is sort of some sort of rye or buckwheat or something, and they're like, wow, this place is great, cool, let's call it Vinland. And wherever this place is, I mean, I believe it to be the south coast of the Gulf of the St. Lawrence. But anyways, yeah, so they spend some time there, and it's all great. By the way, this happens like 1000, roughly the year 1000, that Leif Erikson's first expedition goes there. And I'm not sure, I can't remember how long they spend there, maybe just the winter, and then they all head back to Greenland. They sort of fill up the boat with grapes and whatnot, and head back to Greenland, in Greenland. And on the way, they come across some shipwrecked people, and they sort of bring them on board. And then Leif becomes known as Leif the Lucky, because not just being rescued. If you're being rescued from a shipwreck, you're pretty lucky. But also in the Norse culture, if you are the one who rescues people who are shipwrecked, you are also lucky. So he becomes known as Leif the Lucky. And yeah, he gets back. He tells his dad, "Cool, I found this great land, like all kinds of stuff there." And Leif has a brother, this guy Torvald. So Torvald's like, "Oh, well, I want to check it out too. Let's get a bunch of dudes. We'll go down there." And he goes down, and he actually bumps into the natives. So this is to me, there's a couple things that are really cool about the Vinland Sagas, but to me it's the first contact between the peoples of what is today North America and the peoples of Europe. The very first time in, I mean, how many tens of thousands of years? Approximately 20,000 years since people had come to North America through northern Russia. But even before that, like those people in East Asia and the peoples of Europe didn't have contact for how long? I mean, we're thinking 20,000 years ago. So these two groups of humans who are geographically and temporally have been split off for so long, epochs, actually meet. And of course, what's the first thing the Europeans do is that they find these people hiding under boats covered in hides, they say, so they're canoes, and kill a bunch of them, which is not a great look. And at one point, Torvald gets shot with an arrow, and he gets wounded and ends up dying, so he gets buried in Vinland, and then the crew goes back. Another of the Eric's sons, another brother of Leif and Torvald, is Thorstein. He's like, cool, my brothers are all doing it, I'm going to put together a crew and we'll go as well. He's got this wife Gudrid, and they set off, but they don't quite, I don't even think they leave Greenland, and they all sort of come down with plague, and a bunch of them die, and Thorstein dies, which is kind of like they only have these, to me, small ships, and some of them carry livestock with them. Some of these journeys to Vinland, they take livestock in these ships. There's no sort of hold. It's all open to the air. So how just having like a bunch of cows and pigs and sheep or whatever in the boat with you, like no wonder you're gonna like spread disease and stuff. So that doesn't quite work out. But Gudrid heads back to Greenland to Eric the Red, and that's where she meets this guy Thorfinn Karlsefni. So Thorfinn Karlsefni is kind of like a big important dude. He's really wealthy, whatever. So he marries Gudrid, and they decide to make a voyage to Vinland. They actually stay for 3 years. So they take a whole bunch of men, some women, a whole bunch of livestock. I'm not sure how many ships they take. It must be more than one. And they head to Vinland and set up shop. They stay there for, like I said, 3 years. They have more encounters with the natives. And I wonder if these natives are sort of, if they are the Mi'kmaq people, or, I mean, or 1,000 years ago, it must have been a different people, but maybe it was a Wabanaki people. It's so cool. Like there's references to pemmican, like they describe it as deer blood, or blood mixed with deer marrow or something, which is sort of like, it's like the berries and the deer fat and meat mixed together. It's just stuff that sort of proves that yes, this is true and real, and I don't know, it's so cool. But yeah, they meet with the natives, and they trade. They actually trade. So the natives show up with a whole bunch of furs and stuff, and they sort of make it clear that they want the weapons of the Norse. So the Norse, of course, have iron weapons, which the natives do not have any form of metal. Well, I shouldn't say any form of metalworking. They certainly don't have iron. But the Norse are like, no, we're not trading any weapons with you. So in the saga of the Greenlanders, it's revealed that one of the women, I think it might have been Gudrid, brings out some milk and milk products, which I guess the natives would not have had milk because they didn't have cows. I don't think they had goats. As far as I know, I don't think they would have any. I mean, they must have. They know what milk is. They like, obviously, but yeah, they sort of love it, and so they just start throwing the pelts at these people to sort of try milk and butter and cream, and I assume, and they just are like, wow, this is amazing, and then they go away happy. In the Eric the Red saga, I think it is, they end up trading for red cloth. The Norse have red cloth, and the natives want it, so they give them furs for this red cloth. And by the end of it, they sort of run out of cloth, so they're cutting like tiny strips of it, and they're still like giving them like tons of furs for these tiny strips of cloth that they'll just wrap around their head because they're like, wow, look at this cool red cloth. But yeah, it's really neat. And this is also the expedition where the very first child of European descent is born in North America. So Karlsefni and his wife Gudrid, they have a child named Snorri. And they say that Snorri's 3 years old by the time they leave, so they were there at least 3 years. And I wish we could find that archaeological site where they had set up shop and stayed for years. Of course, there is that site in northern Newfoundland, but I think that was just sort of a wintering site, or like a way station, or a storage station. It was not the main settlement. I mean, if you look at the geography and the landscape of that place in northern Newfoundland, like it's pretty barren. There's not much there. So I imagine much more south in somewhere in the Maritimes that they had this settlement. Anyway, so they eventually go back to Greenland. And then finally we have a sister of Thorvald Leif, so Eric's daughter, Freydis. And Freydis also has an expedition. She goes down there, and it's sort of a disaster. She's portrayed as not a great person. For whatever reason, she wants to go back. So she goes with this other group. The sort of two different groups of people. They agree, hey, let's work together and go down. We'll split the profits 50-50. So these two groups go down, but there's like a weird schism between them, where the one group wants to be chill and cool, but Freydis, for whatever reason, has a big hate on for those, and lies and deceives people, and ends up getting the one group totally slaughtered by the other, and then they all head back. So it's not just some fighting between the natives and the Norse. It's the Norse themselves fighting among each other, and that's just the saga of the Greenlanders. So the other one is the saga of Eric the Red, which is a bit longer and slightly different, but kind of the same. And it starts a bit further back. So it starts with Eric the Red, not discovering Greenland, but settling Greenland and giving it the name Greenland specifically because he wants to attract people to come settle in his new, not kingdom, but this new place. Which I think is crazy that we today in English still call it Greenland. That's really cool. Over 1,000 years later. And in this one, it's not this guy Bjarmi who gets blown off course. It's Leif Erikson himself who gets blown off course and actually visits all of these Vinland and Markland and Helluland before going back to Greenland. And then the other expeditions sort of follow the one of Karlsefni, for example, and Torvald, who gets shot with an arrow and dies there. And there's some slight differences, but overall, it's sort of the same thing. And in this, there's little things like a guy from Germany wants to buy the prow of one of the it might have been Karlsefni ships, one of these ships, because it was like they have decorated carved prows, and he doesn't want to sell it, but the price is right, so he eventually sells it. And it turns out that this was carved from a certain type of wood, burl wood, that came from Vinland. So like this prow from Vinland is now somewhere in Europe being traded or sold around. Now how cool it would be to find that, in a museum somewhere and test the wood and find out, hey, this actually came from North America in the early 11th century. But I mean, it's probably long out of the way. Another thing that's really cool about it is it's writing about a time when Christianity is just starting to enter Greenland. So and also Iceland. So in the saga of Eric the Red, one of the I think it is Leif Erikson, who was sort of a retainer of Olaf Tryggvason, the king of all Norway, the sort of successor of Harald Bluetooth, the first king of all Norway. And I think then the following king was Svein Forkbeard, who became king of England for a bit. Anyway, so Leif Erikson's connected to all these important guys. He's sent by Olaf Tryggvason to convert Greenland into Christianity. And Eric the Red is not a Christian. He's sort of what we call a pagan, still worshiping the old gods of Odin and Thor. And we see some characters who are Christian and some characters who are pagan and still worship Thor. And we see some sort of rituals and sort of sorcery and magic. Not much, but some of it there. And it's this weird, it's not a liminal space, but it's a weird transition time where both faiths seem to be held equally, and there's no conflict between the two. It just seems like there's the old way and the new way, the old gods and the new god. Yeah, so what a fascinating time to be written about, and just the connections with other sort of Viking stories. So they have a genealogy in here, and so Snorri, the very first man of European descent to be born in North America, is a descendant of Ragnar Lothbrok, which, like, one of the most famous of Vikings, which is just, to me, is incredible. Through his father Thorfinn Karlsefni. Karlsefni's a descendant of Ragnar. Like, great times like 6 or 7 or 8, because Ragnar was like 8th century and we're in the 11th century now. But yeah, it's just such a cool story, and super short. You read the thing in one sitting. Just the fact that these people got in these boats and just explored. And just were like, hey, let's spend a few years in this land we've never been to and no one's ever been to before. It sort of explains that they didn't end up staying there, despite it being a land of plenty, because of the natives and sort of the threat of them and being attacked by them. Because you got to think, if there's like 100 Norse versus the thousands and thousands and who knows how many tens of thousands of native people who live in this land, like, they're very, very outnumbered. This isn't like a barren wasteland where they could just go and sort of take over. Like, people are living there. Like, it'd be the same thing if the natives landed in Norway. They couldn't just take over the place. They'd have to fight the Norwegians. But just, yeah, it's just a really cool story, especially with the connection that, like, the land that I'm on right now was the ones that was potentially visited by Leif Erikson and by Thorfinn Karlsefni, and just really cool. So that was the Vinland Sagas.